muting. Oh, yeah, is everyone okay just to stay on mute so we don't get any feedback, obviously, unless you want to jump in with a question at any point. So thank you for having us, Andy. Thank you for asking us to be a part of this. Hope you've all had a good Tuesday. And yes, it's very windy down in the Midlands. You can probably tell I'm close to Birmingham with my Peaky Blinders accent. So Ellie and I both work at Marsh Sport, and we're the insurance brokers to the British canoeing policies and the insurance programme, which cascades down to clubs like yourselves. So what I'm going to do, we've prepared a short presentation and I'll share my screen. Hopefully it'll work. And then we'll just run through a presentation. We have already done this for the English clubs and it went smoothly. So hopefully it'll be pretty seamless. So Andy, can you see the PowerPoint okay?
We've got it clearly, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, okay. So as Andy mentioned, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll just go through them at the end if that's okay. There's not too many slides, so I'm hoping more it's a discussion towards the end of the formal bit. So as I say, Ellie and I look after British canoeing. So just going to give you a brief agenda for today. So an introduction to us and who we are, the insurance covers that are in place, what's covered, who's covered, importantly, where you can find some more information, and is there anything that we can help you with in addition to what you get through your affiliation, basically. So I'm Natalie. I've looked after the British canoeing insurances on and off for around 16 years. One in a previous life at a different brokers, but Ellie and I were fortunate enough to pick up British canoeing again about 2 years ago. But we've got a lot of history with the account, so we do understand. We've got knowledge of previous covers, etc. So I've worked in insurance about 21 years, 16 of those specifically in sport. So we look after lots of water sports clients and lots of big national governing bodies like British canoeing. Over to Ellie. So I'll just let Ellie say hi to you all. Ellie, we can't hear you.
Apologies. Just realised I unmuted the screen instead. Apologies. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm Ellie and I work alongside Natalie on the British canoeing insurances. I deal with the day-to-day inquiries from clubs, coaches, members, delivery partners, etc. I'm based in our Birmingham office. Again, you can probably tell with the accent. And I specialise in sports and have done for around 6 or 7 years. I also provide quotations for additional covers that we can offer to British canoeing and their affiliates, which we'll mention later.
Thanks, Ellie. So in terms of Marsh Sport, we're a specialist division of Marsh. So they're one of the largest insurance brokers, independent in the world. So we've got offices all over the UK, but overseas as well. So the division that we work in, we've got over 100 national governing bodies. We've got around 40 international sports federations, which Ellie also looks after in one of her other roles. We look after about 100 sports globally. We've recently done the insurance for the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, which Ellie and I were involved with on a daily basis. So it was really good fun. We've got about 30 years industry expertise. We look after from professional sport right the way down to grassroots, and importantly, have lots of links with volunteers as well. So in terms of who is covered under the insurance programme, what we often do with national governing body setups is get as many people that are affiliated to the governing body insured under one group policy from a liability policy if we can. So you'll have the national governing body at the top, and then you'll have their affiliated organisations or their home countries. So you can see on the slide, we also obviously look after Scottish Canoe Association, Northern Ireland and Wales, the Canoe Foundation, and also the British Canoe Events Company. And obviously below that, we also want the insurances to cascade down to the other important affiliates, whether that's coaches, volunteers, directors, officers, affiliated clubs, individual paddlers, etc. From a coach's perspective, we also provide insurance cover to coaches that have a trading name and they are allowed to turn over up to 30,000 per annum in order to be part of this insurance. If a coach turns over 30,000, we can look after them separately as sort of a small business, and they would come to Ellie for the quotes. But what we typically do is try and incorporate as many people as we can under one policy umbrella from a liability perspective. So we're buying on economies of scale, because obviously you have thousands of members and hundreds of clubs. So when we purchase a central policy for British Canoeing as the master policy holder, we can get far better rates when you're drilling down the premium, where you've got clubs and members, for example, and coaches, rather than a club going out there and trying to buy the high levels of insurance that we provide. As standalone clubs, it can be very costly for clubs, and they might not know what insurance they need. Most clubs might think, well, we've got public liability, but is that really enough? So I'm going to just hand back over to Ellie, and Ellie's just going to talk about the 4 main covers that are in place at the moment.
Thanks, Natalie. So as part of the club membership, when you affiliate to British Canoeing, or in this circumstance, the Scottish Canoe Association, you automatically receive the benefit of combined liability insurance as detailed on screen now. So there are the 4 covers on there. If you do need or have any questions in terms of those covers more specifically, I'm more than happy to go through them. As part of that cover includes British Canoeing recognised canoeing activities. Clubs are covered for all activities typically associated with the running of the club, including administrative duties and social events. Obviously, that's subject to the relevant risk assessments being kept up to date. Members are also covered for professional indemnity insurance. So if they lead club activities, providing they've been checked and approved as competent by the club committee as part of their safety framework. And then obviously you've got your club associates. Now, Andy, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I know it's slightly different with the Scottish Canoe Association, but club associates registered with the SCA are covered for recognised club activities only. And if you wish to extend for non-club activity, then we recommend upgrading to an individual membership. And this policy runs annually from the 1st of November to the end of October, and all policy documentation, all information relating to the cover and the limits, they're all on the insurance zone, which we'll going on to shortly.
Thanks, Ellie. So as Ellie mentioned, we've got an insurance zone that is specific to those affiliated and insured under that British Canoeing Master Policy. So there are, through the British Canoeing website, but Andy, you may already have a specific page and the link through from your website, but there's lots of information within that insurance zone that talks about the covers that Ellie's just highlighted there from a high level. But there is really good sets of FAQs, whether you're a club, a member, and we've had lots of feedback over the last 2 years. So if there's new FAQs coming through, or they need to be tweaked so that they're more relevant to yourselves, we've updated those throughout that time frame. And if there's anything new, we host that particular insurance zone so we can change and update as quickly as we can. There's a QR code on screen, so actually if you try and scan, fingers crossed it'll work and it'll open it up on your mobile device. So have you just tried that? Yeah, excellent, and it worked. Brilliant. You can get in touch with us directly, so there's a dedicated email address that comes straight through to Ellie's inbox and my inbox as well, and there's our telephone numbers on there. You will also find proof of insurance certificates. So if the local authority or the waterways or a leisure centre, for example, needs proof of your insurance cover, you will be able to get that straight from and download a document. So it wouldn't necessarily have your club name on it, but actually from a proof of insurance perspective, as long as it's noted that you're affiliated under the master policy, you're a beneficiary of that insurance, then you can download that certificate very quickly. It's not password protected. You will be able to share that with whoever you need to from a club perspective. There's also the policy wordings on there, and also some schedules from the actual insurers. So do go on and have a look. If you're not aware of it, it's very easy to navigate. It's set up with certain sections. So if it's just club information you need, it's quite easy to navigate around that. So Ellie, you can just have a chat through what type of information or queries that we get from clubs.
Yeah, of course. So there are many additional types of cover available to clubs dependent on their insurance needs. So some examples are on screen. You've got travel insurance, for example, event cancellation, cover for your buildings. So if you have a boat shed, a clubhouse, you have equipment such as kayaks, canoes, paddles, etc., we can certainly provide a separate property and equipment insurance policy for you. We have several sport and leisure specialists who we can approach for that, all at sort of competitive premiums as well. We've also found over the last couple of years, due to sort of COVID and the increase in the use of technology, that there's been a huge increase in the importance of cyber insurance for all types of business. So if your club uses, sends, stores electronic data, you may benefit from cyber insurance. So I know that probably a lot of this information is quite foreign, and it does sound quite confusing. It's quite confusing to us sometimes as well. But obviously, if you do need any more information about it, please get in touch. And I think just quickly touching on the previous slide, Natalie, the claims contact details are also on the insurance zone. So if you do have any issues or anything that needs to be notified to us, that's all on the insurance zone as well.
Most people as well, just touching what Ellie said about cyber, most people think that buying cyber insurance is going to be really expensive, and it's not. So if you do host, as Ellie said, you're storing personal information, sensitive data in terms of membership and people, you know, the coaches, etc. It is worth having a look at cyber and data cover, because it can provide a really good wide policy cover, and it starts at like £100 or £200. So it's much more competitive than what a lot of people imagine it to be. So if that's of interest, then we can talk to you offline about that. So my computer, it won't flick on to the next slide, but the next slide was basically it's our contact details. So it's my mobile number, my email address, and the same for Ellie. But Andy, hopefully you'll share that afterwards anyway. And as I say, you can get in touch with us very quickly and directly through that insurance zone. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. We haven't gone into the granular detail because you could spend hours doing that. But obviously, if we can move on to questions, it will probably open up a bit more of a discussion on various topics. So Andy, can I hand back over to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Natalie. You can probably stop sharing if you wish, and we can see everybody. We've got the first question in the chat here, which is just an indication of the costs for equipment insurance. Is that something you can give generically, or do you need a bit more detail from clubs to do that?
Yeah, second point there, Andy. Yeah, so because each of you will have different needs and different values of equipment, then we have to get a quote on a bespoke basis. But typically, I would imagine, Ellie, they're probably starting, is it minimum premium around 300 perhaps, dependent on sums insured?
Yeah, usually with sports cover, they start at a minimum premium of £350. That's usually who we go to in the first instance for property equipment cover.
Great, thank you
It is
very
per
much.
annum.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, and I think in terms of getting a rough indication, we don't need masses of information from you. If you want to drop me an email and say, I've got £3,000 worth of sports equipment, can you provide a VRI, a very rough indication? I can do that within sort of an hour's turnaround, and then subject to claims information and further information, we can get that sent out to you.
Thanks, Ellie. A couple more questions starting to come in here. I knew they would flood in. Somebody has from Sue here, couldn't figure out how to get a quote previously, so you've already sorted for this year, but you'd be interested in hearing from next year. So I think the message there is to contact Ellie, and her contact details will be in the follow-up email that I send. So just do that in good time before your current renewal.
I have to say it was really difficult this year. Our renewal costs have gone up by about 50%. Wow. So we needed to look elsewhere.
Who are you insured with, so?
Initially, we were with, I think, Howletts. Does that sound right?
There's a Howden that I know
That's
of.
it. Howden, sorry. Yes, Howden it is. But they had put it up by 50%. So we obviously, and also, even worse, actually, put in a clause that no equipment over 7 years old was included.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen that one before.
Well, we've got quite a lot of stuff that's more than 7 years old.
Yeah.
It's, no problem with it. So that was a problem too. I eventually managed to insure with AMSFAR via Alan Boswell Brokers.
Yeah.
But I did look at your website, and I could, it's full of the public liability stuff, but not so much about how to go about a clubhouse and boats and gear.
Yeah. Noted, Sue. I mean, we can certainly look to get some more information on there, because usually if there's anything that's outside the British canoeing insurance that you automatically get, you'd need to contact myself or Natalie. But if it's not very easy to, not information on there, apologies. But yeah, in terms of getting a property and equipment quotation, we'd ask you to complete a fact find. So drop me an email and I can send that over to you, Word format or PDF, get that signed, and then
well, I maybe will drop you an email asking you to contact me early next December, if that's okay.
Please do, yeah. Or even if you need to, just send me your email address, Sue, and I'll put it in my diary, and then I can approach you. Yeah. If you just let me know the renewal dates.
Another of our problems, although this is just some stuff that happens, is the renewal date was 10th of January. Well, prior to that, you've got about 10 days where you can't get anybody. So you need to do something early December. My email is coming up.
Yeah, I would always say, so get it into us as early as you can. Typically around 6 weeks would be helpful prior to the renewal date, because once we've gathered the information and we need to ask you some more questions, maybe so, we're then beholden to insurers who are an absolute pain. So we can chase and chase and chase. So the sooner we start our process, the better.
Right. New Year's resolution to sort that one out early.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sue. The next question here from Bruce. What is expected in terms of a risk assessment? The club has some standard operating procedures that has much in there, but yeah, it's maybe not called that. What would you say is expected from an insurance point of view?
So from an insurance perspective, I've never been sent a template risk assessment from an underwriter. They would very much say it's back onto the governing body or back onto the club. You know what your inherent risks are to your sport or to your activity. And the importance about a risk assessment from their perspective in the defence of a claim is having that documented and that recorded and it retained. So, we all know if we looked at, 2 risks on a risk assessment, is it detailed enough? Probably not. But in defence of a claim, it's actually having gone through that process to assess what your risk is and then to try and mitigate that risk. So the whole point of the insurance from a liability perspective is if you have been negligent, that's when the insurers will step in to defend. So if you haven't been negligent, arguably the third party doesn't really have a case against you, and the insurers, again, on your behalf, would repudiate that claim. So what they will say is brilliant in terms of your operating procedures, your safety procedures, welfare, child protection through the governing body. So as much as the governing body is disseminating information to you, you obviously need to make that very much your own and to fit your club environment. But unfortunately, the insurers don't say, here's a draft of a perfect risk assessment. What they've often done many years ago is to say, have a look at the HSC website, where there was the 5 steps to risk assessment, which I'm going back years at the start of my career. But you'll often find that the governing body is there to help. So we know obviously that, through Andy's team and through the British Canoeing team, there should be lots of policies and procedures and templates there to help you, but you must very much make it your own. And please do record, because in the event of a claim, the risk assessment or method statement is what is likely to be called upon to defend and to put up a good defence together, hopefully, by your insurers.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. And if I'd maybe just follow up on that, the link I popped in the chat to the risk management, risk assessment, that does include some examples and some templates for risk assessment. And another example would be the case study safety alert that's just been published yesterday or the day before, following the 4 fatalities in Wales last October 21. And in that is an important message about the planning and preparation and the recording of those decisions prior to activities taking place. So yeah, I'll highlight these in the follow-up email, but it's being aware of all of these things and putting yourself in a good place to avoid the accidents happening in the first place. But should they happen, then you've got a case to support it and to defend it as well.
Absolutely, and that's what we purchase insurance for, isn't it? So,
thanks, Natalie. Yep.
There's another one
move on to the next one here.
Yeah, you're keeping. I just spotted one about peer paddles, but I'll leave you to, if you're working through them, Andy, in order.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll just work down them here in the order. So we are going to send out, Cara's asked about the PowerPoint, so we'll send it out in the follow-up email. From Brian here, most club members are not individual SCA members and therefore only insured for club organised club events. So I'll send a link to this, but in broad terms, club associates are only insured for recognised club activity. And then the question is, what is recognised club activity? So that's activities that are risk assessed by and sanctioned by the club committee. They're on the club calendar, perhaps. They're in some way facilitated by the club committee. And that brings the challenge of, well, what if it's in the club Facebook and it's of another member of the club putting it there? And they become grey areas there, but we do need to have absolute clarity. We don't want a situation where somebody after an event finds out that they're not insured. So we have a definition. We have a 2 or 3 sentence definition of what that is. It's on the website, but I'll make sure I put that in the follow-up email. We've also taken some additional steps to notify club associates. So when club associates are registered by the club secretary, they will receive one email that will say you've been registered as a club associate. This means you're insured only for your club recognised club activities. If you wish to be insured for broader activities, please join. Yeah, we're trying to upsell to them, but we're really trying to make sure that they're not thinking that they're covered by an insurance that they're not. And then when they lapse, if the club secretary hasn't renewed them on time, so for example, today, the 31st of January, there are some clubs who haven't yet completed the renewal. So tomorrow morning, all of those club associates will receive an email saying your registration as a club associate has lapsed. If this is incorrect, get onto your club secretary. So obviously we don't want them to get that email in the first place. We want the club secretaries to be keeping on top of it, but we just want to make sure that the information is cascaded and people do understand the situation. So we'll include all those links in the follow-up.
Andy, could I add to
yeah.
that from a claims perspective? So recording your members' names and SCA having a record of that, in the event of a claim, our claims lady in Marsh Sport, she will be contacting and asking whether that particular individual was a paid up club associate, or is it a paid up affiliated club? So it's really important that we're able to say yes at that point, because we want the policy to indemnify and defend the club where needed. We don't want grey areas that we're not sure if somebody's a member or not, because that's if we don't know and we can't provide that information, then it's likely that, you know, the insurers are going to take a dim view on that, because if we don't have the appropriate procedures in place to validate an individual, it can become quite a difficult conversation to have with the insurers. So it's really important that people are paid up in a timely fashion, and that's across all sports. So,
and how would that relate to guests? Because I think we have a rule that you can attend 2 events as a guest before you join.
Yeah, so we've got 2 sort of different topics here. One's about guests and one's about somebody like on an official taster session. So the official taster session, if you like, is me, a potential member that's coming to try out a new paddle sport, and my name and address should be recorded on the date that I have attended, because again, I could have an injury, or I could cause injury to somebody else accidentally, hopefully. So a record of whoever the person is that's on that taster session is just as important as keeping a record of your club associate members. It's, I guess, slightly different as a guest. Are you classing a guest as someone that's going to paddle, or are you classing a guest that's someone that's a guest perhaps of a social event that's linked to a club? And that might be one for you to answer, Andy, if you differentiate between the 2.
Yeah, so the taster one there, I think, is reasonably straightforward. It's up to 6 sessions, and it's beginners to the sport, not existing paddlers coming to try out your club. So we just need to be clear on that. The other guests, I think we generally we don't really have a place for that, because you're either a member of the club, you're a taster session at the club, or you could be a member of the SCA or the wider British Canoeing, taking part in the club activity as a guest of the club. But there isn't really a bit in between. You're sort of one of those things. And that's why we're trying to be clear on the different categories and not have these extra people coming along, or even the sort of parent helpers and so on. Well, actually, if there's other people that are involved in an official capacity, then they should be registered as club associates. And this is one of the reasons why in Scotland, at least, we've tried to keep the costs really to a minimal. So we're not charging a per head fee like we do in the other nations, but we're trying to keep it as cost effective as possible, so that you're not avoiding registering people and then avoiding the insurance provision. We want everybody to be covered for the activities that they need to be covered for.
I mean, there's one important positive, that the insurance will be in place for club social activity. Again, as long as it's recognised, if you're going to be doing bungee jumping as a club, we're going to say no. But if it's a summer barbecue and you're raising money for club funds, and you want to open that out to parents and friends and family, the club will still be insured, and its committee will be insured for hosting those events if something were to go wrong. The difference, I guess, is that the guests that are arriving, the parents, the grandparents, the next door neighbours, we don't need to insure them under the policy if they're sued. What we're talking about on the flip side of that is the clubs are insured to host social events as long as it's linked, and it's kind of lower risk activity, if you like fundraising. Yeah,
and just to Bruce's follow-up question in the chat, a visitor who is a good kayaker but not an SC member and not permitted to join any paddle unless they join the host club. So yeah, that person in that situation should either become an SCA member or become a club member of your club and be registered as a criteria that you have in your club to say, well, if you want to come on one of our paddles as a guest, you need to prove that you're an SCA member, or you need to join us before you come on the event. And how much you charge them for club memberships entirely up to you, but you would need to register them in that. You know, if it gets into the next tier of the club affiliation, then that would bump you up a category at your next renewal. If we move on now to the next question, just in the working back up the 1924 timed question from Bruce. What do you regard as the real or likely risks outside of buildings and kit? And maybe with that, Natalie, you could give a flavour for the types of claims that we have dealt with in recent years. Because that would, you know, for people that haven't had to deal with them in the past might not have a clearer understanding.
From a claims perspective, we do have fatalities. Sadly, if somebody loses their life, it can be often cheaper for the insurers to deal with. And I know that doesn't sit particularly well, but if there isn't any negligence attaching and it is purely an accident, from an insurance perspective, there's not really a claim to answer. The difference is probably, I'm trying to think how many years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, there was an individual coach that was leading a session, and a gentleman did lose his life, and there was a concern around negligence of the younger coach, even though he was perfectly qualified. That claim actually resulted in 3.2 million that I dealt with that are previous insurance brokers for British Canoeing. The concern there was perhaps that the coach was fairly young compared to the 2 individuals that he'd taken out for the day. And he was doing that as a coach, earning from the sport, which was perfectly, you know, adequate and insured. But the weather turned quite badly, and unfortunately, the gentleman lost his life from drowning. The reason that it's a very unusual claim to get anywhere near that amount for someone losing their life. The reason being was that in his former life, he had security businesses in Afghan, Iraq. So as a security consultant, his future loss of earnings were significant for his family. And he also had dependent children going off to university. So although there was no admission from a health and safety perspective against the coach, the family actually made a successful claim under the British Canoeing policy, and it was settled at 3.2 million. Hence why we buy very large limits of indemnity. You're currently insured at 10 million. So apart from sort of that one very serious incident, we've had lots of people unloading their equipment from the roof of their cars, damaging third-party windscreens, smashing third-party windows in car parks when they're loading or unloading. We've had a directors and officers claim where we know we're getting club committees falling out and not necessarily following procedure. So even though they have procedures and policies, they're not necessarily following them, which therefore means, you know, that they haven't dealt with something particularly well, maybe a member disciplinary. The sort of standard slips and trips are very few and far between in sport these days. We tend to be seeing child protection, welfare related claims, unfortunately, directors and officers where you've got, you know, a bit of infighting between committee members or fallings out. And as I say, unfortunately, there are fatalities, but there's only one very serious one that I've ever dealt with for British Canoeing.
Yes, thanks, Natalie. Hopefully that answers your question there, Bruce, and gives a flavour for some of the things. And we don't want to what Natalie's there is hopefully to give you confidence that the insurance is there to protect, and but also to give you a information to make good informed decisions about how you plan and manage activities, so that you're staying within the remits.
So absolutely, that was
question.
Sorry, could I?
Yeah, sorry, Bruce, on you go. Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I thought that was those examples were very useful. The second part of my question then is, what are the likely things? What are the things that we are most likely to slip up on ensuring we do things in such a way we stay protected? What are the things that we most need to worry about making sure we have? You've mentioned recording who is at events, for example. I think we normally do okay on that, but there may be other things. And for example, the discussion we just had about what guests means, I for one had not twigged that a guest had to be a beginner until I've heard it from you now. So are there other things there that either you, Andy, or our brokers know of, which are things where clubs might easily make a mistake unintentionally?
From a claims perspective, where we've found clubs have been negligent is often where they haven't followed their own procedures correctly. So they've fallen foul of all the wonderful policies that you've written out, and they've, in the heat of the moment, they've either been ignored or forgotten about. So, for example, we've had lots of amateur sports clubs where they've given a coach a disciplinary, they've given a member a disciplinary. The reason for the disciplinary was completely legitimate. However, the person hasn't been disciplined in the correct format and procedure. So they've really fallen foul of not following all the brilliant work they've done up until that point. And I think that's something to be very mindful of. Keeping records is absolutely key in the defence of a claim, because if it's not written down and documented, we have no evidence that you've had those brilliant policies and procedures in place. Child protection, we unfortunately, you'll have seen it in the press, sport is being absolutely hammered from a welfare and safeguarding perspective. So again, it's about not just making sure someone's got a criminal record check up to date. It's all of those things apart from that. So it's about the recruitment of individuals. It's about getting references on individuals and coaches, and delving as deep as you can. But again, recording, because if the club has done everything possible to mitigate something happening, the insurers will be on your side about it, and it'll be much easier for us to work with you and defend. But just, not all insurance is compulsory in the UK. So we have motor insurance, as we all know. There's engineering inspection, and there's employer's liability. You do get employer's liability through Andy, but you need to be mindful of the other risks. And then if you choose not to insure them, that's absolutely fine. But you've thought about them, you've made the decision as to why you don't necessarily want them. So yeah, if there's anything that you ever think, well, I'm not sure of, then you can just contact me and Ellie. And lots of clubs will often ring us saying what if scenarios. So, and we're happy to talk about that on a specific basis. I've just seen employers' liability pop up. Do you want me to answer that very quickly?
Yeah, go for it, thanks.
It covers claims from volunteers as well. They don't have to be paid under contract. It might be someone that's doing work experience in a club environment for you.
Yeah, great. And we did send out, I think last year there was some follow-up information about ERI numbers, employers reference numbers, and exemption from employers from the ERI. So that raised a few questions of, well, we don't have any paid employees, why do we need employers liability? So hopefully your answer there is explained that it is still required for the volunteers, although they might not be seen as employees to the rest of us, but actually from an insurance point of view, that is a requirement. So thanks for that clarification. There's a question about RYA. So there are some clubs that are multi-sports clubs that are affiliated maybe to the RYAs as well as ourselves. Do you provide insurance for RYA or other governing bodies that might fall into that? Do you know?
Yeah, so the RYA, Marsh also purchased a broker's called JLT, and I believe that RYA are within our group, but it's not looked after by myself and Ellie. But I would say, dependent on, if there is an accident, is it to do with the yachting aspect or the paddle sport? That bit's quite clear. If it's activity related, if it's somebody slipped over in a car park or it was a social club event, that's a little bit more difficult to, and the two insurers would have to argue that out, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thanks. The question here about risk assessments for and peer paddles. So if there's a peer paddle of qualified coaches acting beyond the remit, it's not an official club trip, where would the liability lie in the event of an accident?
So is this a more senior member that has taken it upon themselves to host a peer paddle?
Yeah, probably.
I think Alina's just coming in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got a number of people that regularly organise peer paddles. Sometimes you've got qualified coaches going along there. They're going along to join that peer paddle, but it's not an official sanctioned club trip. And the sort of the grey area is what happens there if you've got a qualified coach. It's labelled as a peer paddle, but you've got a qualified coach there who may and probably will be at a remit if you've got more than they can safely coach or guide down the river. Where does that, if there is an accident, what happens there? Is the coach liable, or just a bit of clarity on that would be good.
Andy, I might divert to you on your thoughts on that, and then I'll explain mine.
Yeah, so I think from my point of view, the insurance there is about liability. There's and part of that is following the recommendations of the governing body, and British Canoeing has deployment guidance in terms of reference. So people that are operating beyond the limits of their qualifications, that does happen and can happen where there's an active deployment decision. So in a club situation, then a committee could be making a decision with all of the evidence in front of them, including qualifications, and making that decision. But if this is a peer paddle, then who is it that would be making that decision? Who's sanctioning that trip to happen? And it's probably no one, or it's a bit of a passive decision. So I would say that's operating out of remit and does have the risk of not being covered. And that's why we want, we don't want people not to be covered. We want people to be operating within their qualifications. And if it's a group of people going off for a paddle together, then for them to be individual members in their own right would give them cover for themselves, and to be qualified coaches, or leaders, whoever's leading that trip, and operating in the remit. And then, all is well and insurance cover is in place for them. But once we start going out of qualifications and out of membership, then people are out on their own, and that's risks that they should understand and take actively rather than unknowingly. So the education of what's in and what's not, I think, is quite key here. Natalie, would you agree?
Yeah, so Ellie and I actually went to British Canoe in their offices in Nottingham and discussed this very thing probably about 4 or 5 months ago now. But we also discussed people that were just setting up Facebook pages, and to the innocent person, you would assume that's a club activity, and it really isn't. And it's just a group of people that want a social paddle that have set up a Facebook page. The concern is really that if a coach is taking part in that activity, they're the ones really that would be seen to have that duty of care to the other paddlers, because they could well have the first aid certificate, etc., the rescue. And I'm not sure that person would want to put themselves in that position if it's not a recognised activity, because, as Andy says, arguably, it's not insured. You're not following the guidance of the governing body.
Cool. Yeah, excuse me, that's kind of what I was expecting to hear. It just, there's there is a bit of grey area. So if a coach was there, they would have to kind of step back and say, actually, this isn't for me.
This is nothing to do with me. I think the issue you've got there though is if there was genuinely an incident where somebody needed some emergency rescue, the coach probably would step in, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
You know, so ultimately it's putting them in quite a difficult position.
Yeah,
So
cool. That's great.
yeah,
Thanks for that.
we're aware it's happening, and it happens across all sport, and it's really difficult to police because you want to encourage the sport, but in the safest possible way, which is the guidance that's set out by the experts.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on. The next question here from Cara is about trips abroad, club trips that go overseas. What's your thoughts on that, Natalie?
Yeah. Ellie, do you want to jump in? I'm conscious I keep still in the limelight.
So from a liability perspective, cover is available, providing it's sort of sanctioned, organised and run by the club. We don't offer within the package that you get through the governing body, it doesn't include travel insurance, but we can obviously look at getting an additional travel insurance policy set up for you. But yeah, from a liability perspective, Natalie, I'm sure you'll agree that there's no implications from that perspective.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Great, thank you. There's a question here from Jim, which the club has around 20,000 of equipment, and they want some cover in place for that. So I think that's we've addressed that already. Jim, you contact Ellie in plenty of time for your renewal, or now if you don't have it already, and Ellie can help get that cover or get a quote for that. But that's not covered under the British Canoe Insurance at the moment. There's a question from Ken. Sometimes a club associate from another club might join along on one of your club activities. Are they covered? In simple terms, no, they're not, because they're only registered. The club associate registration is unique to a club, so they need to be linked to your club. And you know that may cost you more money if you go into another tier. But bear in mind the tiers are up to 20, up to 40, up to 100, up to 200. So you know, one or two people here and there won't usually trigger you into the next category, but you just need to register them on the Just Go platform linked to your club as well as to the club they're already in.
And Andy, just to follow that up if I can, because I'm struggling with that a little bit, because sometimes what we find is visitors come along from another club and they see us taking part in an activity on the night, but saying, can we come along and join you, give us a bit of the background, etc. We say that's okay. We haven't got access to actually physically register them on the platform for that one night.
Okay, and maybe there's, on practical terms, you can say, well, people can come along as a guest at our club sessions, either if you're an SCA member, because then you know that they're covered and they can show you their digital membership card, or they need to tell you in advance, and you could have a guest membership of your club or some other way. But yeah, if they're turning up at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night and you didn't know that they were turning up, then that puts you in a difficult position, because you can't well, you could register them if you've got online access there at the side of the water, but yeah, easier said than done, I appreciate. So that's just how you communicate and share the information of who's welcome to come on your trips. But if they come along on that and they don't meet that criteria and they've not been prior registered, then they're not going to be covered.
I thought we said earlier that guests had to be real beginners and not good paddlers from else. It had to be a true taster session, in other words.
Yeah, but I think what Ken's describing there is an existing paddler from another club that wants to come on his club's trip on a particular evening or weekend. Then that can happen if they're an SCA member, because SCA members could rove around clubs and don't need to join the clubs themselves, as long as the club is happy to welcome them. But if a club associate wants to take part in an activity through another club, then they need to be registered as a club associate for that particular club. But they don't need to be a taster, they don't need to be a beginner.
I think what we've been trying to encourage, certainly in the far north, is clubs to work closer together and go on each other's activities to get more experience. But now this seems to be a slight barrier going in front of us in doing that.
Yeah, and there is scope. There is also scope for multi-club activities. So in this, and I'll send this round in the follow-up as well. But this document which defines types. So we've defined it as one club and up to 3 further clubs could have inter-club activities or events. But there's some criteria in there around who the lead club. So rather than it's claiming that 3 clubs are collectively organising something, and in reality everything falls through the cracks. One club is the host, 3 others are supporting the event, and then there are ways to have members from multiples there. So just read that in a bit more detail. It's on page 2 of that latest link. But I think what you're describing there is, there might be some closer working, but we can't have, what we don't want and shouldn't have is club associates of one club that are then taking part in lots of events across multiple clubs, because they should just become club associates of the multiple clubs, or become an SCA member in their own right. Just going back to the questions, I think that's it. So the end, the last one there from Ellie, that's just your message and Jim. We planned for about an hour for this, so we're sort of we've got through quite a lot of questions there, which is wonderful. So final chance for any other questions that people have, but noting that you might think of ones later on, and the contact details for myself and Ellie and Natalie will be in the follow-up email. So this isn't your last chance for questions, but it's your last chance on this live webinar at least. And realise that insurance... Oh, sorry, Natalie, yep.
I was just going to say, has everyone found it useful? Oh, somebody's just said, yeah, we're not trying to scare you, and we work for British Canoeing and Andy, we don't work for the insurers. So, we'd much rather be honest and open, but you've got a really good broad insurance policy in place so that you can do most things that you want to do apart from the bungee jumping bit. But yeah, we're your insurance brokers. We're here to help you. So if there's things that you think I'm not sure of, that was a bit confusing, it was insurance terminology, then you just need to reach out to us. As I say, we don't work for the insurers. We're the nice guys or girls. So if we can help, we will.
I think as well, in terms of the relationship that we have with the insurers and obviously the governing body, if you met the insurers, they're actually equally as happy and supportive. They want, to do as much as they can for the governing body. The majority of the insurers do actually either do some kind of sporting activity. So they are very much supportive. So if there are on occasions, slight differences or things that need to be questioned that might be slightly outside of the parameters of the insurance, as long as they know and as long as we tell them everything, they do try and support as much as they can, don't they, Natalie?
Yeah,
they're not.
And from you're with Hiscox, who are a really good insurer, and from a claims perspective, although Hiscox were in the press about COVID and business interruption claims, actually Hiscox and as an insurer are fantastic in respect of claims defensibility. So you're probably with one of the best sports insurers as well. So yeah, they're normal people.
There's one more question here from Cara to Natalie or Ellie. If you were a volunteer in a club, what would you expect it to have in place? What are the products, the insurance products as a minimum?
I guess we always talk about public liability. When people talk about insurance, they say, if you've got third-party liability cover. If I was an individual committee member, I would want to make sure if I'm sued, am I covered selfishly? So obviously the public liability is there for club events, and if somebody's, someone comes on and does an activity if they're injured. But importantly, as a committee member and a volunteer, presumably, you're making decisions and giving up your time to support that club, and you're probably doing it because you were passionate about paddle sport, or your children's involved in the club, or you're a welfare officer. So I think it's important that you've got the committee members cover. So if you're sued personally, Cara, in your own name, not the committee name of the club, you are protected by this insurance policy. and that's the directors and officers cover. In the kind of scary times we live in, I guess it's important that there's abuse cover in place, again, to protect committee members, welfare officers. So that's an important element of the cover that you have in place as well.
Yeah, I was more meaning what sort of policies and procedures should the club have? Like a trips policy or a trips procedure or a events procedure, or what should be what would you expect as a bare minimum?
So that goes back to Andy. So what we would typically say is that your guidance needs to come from the governing body.
All right.
And that's not me.
In reality, there isn't an enormous list of must-haves in place. So there's some basic governance documents. I'll send a link to this at the end as well, so that things like having a constitution in place, and then there's and a safeguarding policy. I think that's the sort of two main ones, and a health and safety policy. But beyond that, things like disciplinaries and a whole range of other policies and procedures that you could have in place. Usually we would end up saying, well, the default, if you don't have one, is that you then revert to the SCA's one. So we've got lots of people that will, you know, when a situation arises, they'll say, well, we don't have something in place, what do we do? And, you know, the defendable position is to then revert to the governing body's policy and substitute the name SCA for your club. And that seems like a reasonable thing to do in those circumstances. And because clubs do vary very widely in this type of activities they do, so it's difficult for us to say, well, you must have a trips policy or an overnights policy or some other thing, because then suddenly it's one size fits all. So I think you just need to, the idea here is people should be, attending training. They should be qualified coaches that are, through their training and qualifications, understand the needs for those things. So it's competent people that are making decisions and planning activity as well. And doing all of those things will put you in a good place. And as we've heard from Natalie, we've got very good insurance cover to protect us from that negligence as well.
So we're going to send a list of those things then, Andy? That would be good.
Yeah. I'll send a link to that. Yeah. Great. Well, huge thanks to Natalie and Ellie for making insurance a bit more exciting than it sounds at the start. Hopefully, I'm sure all learned some good things there. But really, we don't want people to go away frightened by any of this. We want you to have some reassurance that actually we've got really, really good relationship with our insurance brokers at Marsh and very good cover in place. And as long as you stick within the broad parameters and follow good guidance and best practice, then actually you should be able to sleep easy at night. And there's lots of help around, and other sessions that we run. We will be planning a session soon about deployment of coaches and leaders, for example, because that's something that brings up a lot of questions. And engage in some of the e-learnings. There's things in there around the risk management, risk assessment, and so on as well. So any questions, get back in touch and we'll do our best to answer those. And I'll send an email with all the follow-ups probably tomorrow.
And I think,
and hopefully,
will you be sharing the recording, Andy? For those who couldn't attend, if anybody wanted to. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there will be others that haven't. We've got 80 odd clubs, and there's only 11 or 12 here tonight. So the recording will be available to those others in the future as well. We're putting together an e-learning package for club officials as well. So we'll sort of build this into it so that other people can watch this in the future. Okay, so thanks very much to everyone for taking part and all your active questions, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night and what's left of January. And thank you.
See you all soon.
Yeah,
thanks,
nice to meet you all.
Yeah, thanks for
See you
having us.
later. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.